Chapter 3. Swimming in the Grief of Longing for Aeyla. Falling in love. I mean, the beyond every day, throw yourself away, I can't eat, I can't sleep. All I do is call your name, I see your face in the milking pail, in the way my computer cord coils up. I'm terrified when I can't make out your face in the gooish surface of my morning oatmeal type thing. Cannot be found by searching. But love of this kind most certainly exists, and it is one of life's most essential stages, for it is an ecstatic tailspin right into the bigger, full-on life. Like the time when you were 13, and there was this older woman of probably 15 no one had ever seen before, who was not from your area, but came gracefully drifting by with her white short-sleeved starched parochial blouse, with her books held tight to her breasts, her thighs covered by the pleats of her Catholic school tartan, showing the sun glaze of the rosy gold of her light mahogany knees pumping across the playground, at least a quarter of a mile away, with two friends who were from your district in tow. For 3 days, for a couple of endless seconds, she sails that close to you at the end of the lunch hour, and gone mad when all those kinds of delicate feelings blathering into your ribcage start popping like harp strings as they were chewed off their moorings by mice of everyday concerns with their sharp stainless steel teeth of hopelessness. Every minute another ping and pop, and unable to stand it anymore to find out who she is, you plot and wait and hide and talk around about with the kids you've never had the courage to even approach, who are associates of her associates, till you find out her name might be Aeyla. Maybe Aeyla, maybe not. But for now, Aeyla is the mantra on your tongue, the face on your banner, the sound of all your brave and crazed emotion toward Aeyla, your heartache growing into a million songs to write, and yowling like a whiny maniac, you sing them over and over again. And whatever you want to call it, love of this kind is a kind of grief. For of course Aeyla was lost to you before you ever saw her, and 10 seconds a day for 3 days at a quarter of a mile away was as close as you would ever get to someone like Aeyla. And God forbid you would ever meet her, speak to her, or touch her. Why? Because this first time of falling is a precious brush with seeing and wanting the divine for the first time. This would-be love affair must not succeed, for you are not a person yet. If Aeyla ever came within range, she would get smaller and lesser and end up being nothing more than another complicated person like yourself. Her name would probably really be Bertha, Trish, Sherry, or Joe, and she would burp and cackle, have banal cookie-cutter opinions, and chatter constantly about herself and useless synthetic things. Not like the Aeyla who cared about the subtle and the wild, and was only surviving in an unsympathetic society secretly in love with the same things you loved. This is not to say that a person like Joe could not be loved and give love, but only by another person who could love a person and be a person to love, and you are not a person yet. But you are a very important being, a pre-person. Only a pre-person can be totally demolished by the grief of deep desire for the divine they see in another person, as an ostensibly tangible foreign presence, sailing across the playground away from you, but dragging everything you must become straight into the spiritual medicine water that will let the embryonic crocodilian egg of your soul hatch into the magical bird you must slowly fledge into. Young infatuation means you have seen and felt God, mistaking the divine for a person. Because of that, you mustn't meet what your young mind still thinks is a particular person. For if you should, the spirit you're in love with will flee away from you faster than a thought, back behind the spiritual opacity of the hard, heartless, everyday procedure of people's unthinking attitudes. They're not seeing Aeyla. But let it not be mistaken that these first young waves of heart-wash for Aeyla really are for the divine. It's life's plan, not a mistake. This is something we must all have had run its heat and ecstatic irrational lightning through our budding hearts, or we shall forever be unimaginative and never hopeful again, and worse yet, unable to see and revere it when it shows up in our children. It is a sweet grief, but a real grief, Some people never see or feel God at all. Some worry that infatuation can become addiction, but that's hardly the same thing as falling in love. The only time this kind of falling in love is dangerous or fatal is if we are not surrounded by the wise who know to deprive us of any proximity with our beloved, forcing us into the adolescent subterfuge of grief's poetry, into the expression of longing and losing, and away from any tendency to laziness, by allowing us to pretend, falling in love with people who are more hip, of easy access, or of the right sort. If as two teenagers we should mutually fall in love, or both I and the beloved are equally in love with one another in this way, then both of us will expect the other to be what we think we see there. I don't like the word projection because it takes the holy and dashes him or her on the rocks of supposed rational thinking. But what each of us sees in the other is devastating, delicious, ecstatic, and painful presence of the divine on earth in the form of a walking, talking human. The problem is that a regular person, while he or she can hold the holy for you like a pot holds water, the person carrying God for you is not God. Mistaking the human person for the divine will only end in a great confusing rage and a feeling of having been betrayed. Our love has gone away, will be the cry. No, the divine has not gone away, only the pot that held her long enough for our longing hearts to behold the divine. Because we have expected another being like ourselves to be God, it is our sight that can't see that the holy is everywhere. It's too much to expect another kid to be God. No one can be that grand. It's best to sing and write love poems to the divine as the person we love but can never possess. This cooks us with grief until we begin to make sounds like a real person who could love another person. Young people can turn into adults who have become hard, cavalier, or are hurt to the point of living with a violent attitude or of making violence to themselves. The young might join gangs or otherwise harm the world for the unmetabolized pain and disappointment of their losses. Then they are the victims of having no real culture, and no wise folk with eyes to see, and ways to direct grief away from violence and back to the anguish of beauty. That is why real creatures, societies of so-called simpler people, will not allow young people to touch one another in this desperate wave of longing until they are initiated beyond the person stage, beyond the pre-person stage. The Tutuhil Maya, of whom I used to be a part, felt that holding their young women and men apart during this time, right after they became enamored of each other, was not only necessary so that each could grow into a person that could desire and love another person without either disappointing the other when they found out the other was not the divine, but also very importantly, because these young women and men were truly seeing and desiring the actual voluptuous nature of the divine. These young people, as frustrated and emotional as they had to be in love in such an involuntary way, were the only individuals in the culture capable of being educated by initiation to retrieve the divine from the dismembered state where the adult population had left her. Only these youth, because of their grief, after being educated through initiation, were the ones who could put her back together again. It was a byproduct of putting the divine back together again through all the poetry, wisdom, and cultural depth during initiation that changed the young man or woman from a pre-person into a regular person, now capable of loving another regular person who burped and was forgiven for thinking small thoughts. Being an adolescent in today's citified modern world is so intensely manipulated and obscured with so much mental detour and pseudo-sophistication as managed by pop culture that it may be hard to imagine that good, simple, romantic humans could still be found in the modern context. But I swear there are still young people hiding and waiting in this world for wisdom to allow them to love what they can't touch without destroying themselves or anyone else in the process. It is to be found. The grief of seeing the beauty of Aeyla, or her, or him, so unattainable, so gorgeous, so amazingly different than the rest of the chumps we are surrounded by, should be, and definitely can be, the driving force which can take the grief of the loss of the magic and majesty of our mother's heartbeat and womb, and converted into seeing the same magic and majesty inside another human, and then again like a baby singing, writing poems, songs, making things, doing amazing, never before seen, non-commercial creative motions that praise the beloved. In other words, the so-called unrequited heartbreak of Aeyla, so far away and unreachable, forces us to begin to learn how to court the divine. The first grand step toward becoming a whole person, a person who can turn loss into grief, and grief into a song of life-giving praise. This is the metabolization of grief into beauty. Without this churning adolescent era of our lives, we will forever remain a pre-person, unhappily waiting, with dyed white hair, for life to happen to us. It's so much grander a thing to have adults, who in their youth had adults to guide the hot river of infatuation for them. Adults who know about these things, who can, instead of stealing youth from the young or exploiting the distinctive divine infatuation, corroborate and praise the wild desire in its distance from the object of that desire, and know when to let it go its way. But the world of today doesn't think like this. You could. Why not begin? Why not bestow what you have never received and learn to love Aeyla, whom you never could have?